Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. Ian Cameron and Rob Vino back with us for a second guest spot. Always great to have Rob on the show. Great insight with football each and every time he joins us. Rob, it's that time of year where you got NFL preseason winding down with the final week, CFL right in the middle of the season. We're actually right around the midway point of the CFL season. Hard to believe it's gone this quickly. And yes, we will have college football regular season games to watch on Saturday as week 0 kicks off. It's that time of year, and it doesn't get much better.
Yeah, what a joy, right, Ian? I mean, we wait, since maybe like May, and maybe even April, you start itching once the college basketball tournament ends, and you're like, where's football? Spring practice is happening. But what seems like it will never get here as the years go by seems like it gets here quicker and quicker and quicker, and these sports overlap more and more and more. You mentioned a few that are going on right now. Also busy with the WNBA at this point in time. I'll say real quick before we move on.
I don't follow and bet or watch too much WNBA, Rob, but even I caught wind of one hell of a performance last night by Paige Beckers. Holy mackerel.
Yeah, UConn Husky, which is near and dear to my heart. Paige put on a show. But what I did the last 2 summers, Ian, and you do cover it. I don't cover Major League Baseball anymore. That got to be way too much of a grind. You need a little bit of time off and use the summers now more for CFL, WNBA, and football prep. But to your original point, glad it's here. Very, very glad it's here, finally.
No doubt, no doubt. We will talk. This is going to be a great show because we'll break down the CFL Week 12 card. We will talk all 4 games on the college football Week 0 card as well for Saturday. But before we get to that, we will touch briefly on NFL preseason Week 3. It is the final week of the preseason. And I'll just mention now a lot of these games, Rob, I don't know if you agree, but I am waiting longer with my going to the window with a lot of these bets this week because I find this final week of the preseason, it's a lot more dicey and up in the air and unpredictable when it comes to what coaches are going to do, how are our starters going to play, and if they do, for how long. I think there's a lot more indecisiveness with a lot of the coaches in these games. So I haven't fired on a lot, but I'll throw out a couple of bets that I've taken already for preseason Week 3. And one of them, that we're recording this on a Thursday, one of them is from one of the 2 Thursday night games. I've been on the New York Giant games over twice already, and I'm going to take it again this week. Now, they do have one of the best quarterback rotations going in the preseason, in my opinion. Obviously, we're not going to see Russell Wilson tonight for the New York Giants, but we're going to see probably the last extended playing time in a while for Jackson Dart. Unless Russell Wilson struggles and gets benched or he gets injured, we're not going to see Jackson Dart much after this. So this is his last opportunity to really show Brian Daboll and that coaching staff, I'm here, and I'm looking to keep improving and show you that I'm ready to go if the time comes, and I'm required here at quarterback for the New York Giants. And he's been solid for a guy that's coming straight out of college, Ole Miss, and getting his first NFL reps. He's looked pretty good here in the preseason for the Giants. And after that, Winston and Tommy DeVito in some combination, in some form. So it's a really good rotation. We've seen them be able to move the football, put up points later in games because of this strong depth that they have in the quarterback room. So I would expect the Giants to score points. They've scored 31 and 34, in the 2 preseason games. That's almost getting to the total by themselves. You just need a little bit out of the Patriots. And I just preferred over instead of laying the points because I understand fully why the Giants have taken all the money, and Mike Vrabel's already said that Drake May's not going to play. Not going to see many of the starters for the Patriots. It's going to be a Josh Dobbs, Ben Wooldridge quarterback duo. Dobbs, I think, is capable. And I'll be honest, Rob, I did not expect much out of Ben Wooldridge. He's actually surpassed my expectations a little bit. Certainly been a little bit more effective than I thought. So I think we can get enough offense out of New England here in this game. Not to mention the Patriots have shown some willingness to want to put a good effort out here in August. Vrabel and the Pats are 2-0 straight up and against the spread here in the preseason. Another reason why I'm a little hesitant to lay almost a touchdown here with the Giants, even though I love their quarterback rotation. So I went with the over instead there. And then as far as the other bet that I really like is the 3-team money line parlay, because these are all small favorites that I wanted to just ask to win the game rather than lay points. Pittsburgh is 1. They're playing Carolina tonight, and I understand why they've taken money all week. Dave Canales is 1-4 straight up in ATS in the preseason. Hasn't shown much care to win these games in August. Not to mention the offense has been dreadful. What is it, barely not even 20 points in the 3 games combined, or the 2 games combined so far in the preseason for Carolina. Andy Dalton, who's supposed to be able to come in there and move the team a little bit, boy, he's been dreadful. The offense has not been good even when Andy Dalton's been in there for Carolina. So Pittsburgh and Tomlin, an overall winning track record straight up in ATS in the preseason. So Pittsburgh's one of those 3-team money line legs, and the other 2 are from Saturday. Baltimore, I already put in that parlay with Pittsburgh, just because Washington and Dan Quinn, you can only see it so many times, Rob, before you figure it out. Dan Quinn just doesn't really care too much about the preseason. I mean, the track record in Washington and Atlanta as a head coach in preseason games is pretty bad straight up in ATS. Baltimore might have an edge there in that game. I think they can get it done. So Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and then the other team I threw in a 3-team money line parlay, they've taken money as well. It's Buffalo. They got absolutely crushed last week at Chicago. Josh Allen, starters didn't play. And, normally it's a throwaway and coaches aren't going to make a big deal of it. Sean McDermott actually kind of got upset and agitated with what Buffalo did last week and how poorly they played on a Fox national TV game on a Sunday night against the Bears last week. So I think Buffalo is going to want to have a little more fire in their belly. Todd Bowles has already said all his starters are out, not playing for this game for Tampa Bay on Saturday. So I think the Bills are a good side there and can win that game. And I think their starters probably will see the field more than they have in the first 2 games. So there you go. Over in the Patriots-Giants on Thursday night, and a Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Buffalo 3-team money line parlay that pays plus 288, the price that I got with that. Rob, anything you want to mention that you're liking early here for preseason week 3?
Yeah, I'll say real quick, Ian, that a lot of your points on the coaching, absolutely. Dave Canales just really doesn't care, would rather keep players healthy. And for what it's worth, watching Carolina a couple of weeks in a row now, the weakness is certainly depth in the trenches, both sides. They're running for like 59 yards a game, and they're trying to. They just can't do it with their depth. So when you're in a game situation where depth is required, because that's who's going to play, you have to assume that Carolina probably isn't going to move the ball real well one more time. Couple of things, very slight plays. I'm going to get back to your generalization of week 3. I'm with you. I don't play a lot here in week 3 because we are, this is basically the cut game, right? We got to get down to 53. We got to see everybody right down to 4th teamers if you have them. So very, very unpredictable. Couple of things that have been predictable. D'Amico Ryans, head coach of the Houston Texans, now 8-0 to the under. They've played 7 of the 8 games that they've played since he's become head coach in the preseason. I'm talking about now, have totaled 32 or less. And so it's the number's low, but it's low for a reason. Houston, good on the defensive side, both games so far. Not good on the offensive side. I'll trust the 8-0, so I made a little bit of a play on that under.
That is the lowest total on the board this week in the preseason, by the way, that Houston-Detroit game. So goes with what you're saying.
Rightfully so. I like the Jets a little bit. I think the Jets will win by a field goal. You talked about Buffalo and Sean McDermott being a little bit angry. The Jets got pretty much pounded by the Giants last week in the Battle of New York. Not that it means a ton because it's a preseason game, but it's still in-state rivals. You have Aaron Glenn, guy trying to set a new culture in New York, against Brian Dable, a guy trying to save his job. Dable's team has looked the part in preseason so far. But Philly doesn't care about this game, just being outside the area and hearing the chatter all week long. A little bit nervous after that Landon Dickerson injury, which turned out to be favorable for them. But there's a couple of things going on there where they're working new corners and a bunch of stuff going on there that's more experimental than trying to win. And I would presume that Aaron Glenn, for the most part, if push comes to shove at the end of the game, he'll try to win it. Again, you're trying to establish a winning culture with the Jets. So like the Jets a little bit, like Houston, I could agree with you on Giants over. Dable's offense has been really good early on. And to your point, Vrabel's a veteran head coach. I really didn't know what to expect out of him preseason-wise, second time around. But they performed well both weeks. So maybe the side is a little stickier at 6.5 than his total in this game. Those are the 2 I looked at real quick here. But I'm not going to search and dig just to play for play's sake here in preseason week 3.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes the cautious route is the best route, especially when you're talking, yes, NFL preseason week 3 can be a little bit more variance, a little more randomness in what we see on the football field. All right, let's turn to the Canadian gridiron, north of the border. And I'll say this, Rob, about the CFL, man. Up until the 2 Saturday games, which actually turned into blowouts, Saskatchewan romping Hamilton, and then, of course, BC romping over just an injury crushed Montreal Alouettes team, which lost their 3rd quarterback of the season to injury in Caleb Evans, already dealing with Davis Alexander's absence, McLeod Bethel Thompson's absence, and now Caleb Evans torn ACL out for the year, and they have to finish the game with the former Bowling Green Falcon and Florida International Golden Panther, James Morgan, at quarter. Yes, I remember because I've been watching college football and handicapping it every year, just like Rob. I remember him from those days. And tough spot for him, obviously, with Montreal trailing, and they couldn't do anything really defensively, which was really the disappointing part. You could figure they were going to struggle offensively, but no answer for Nathan Rourke in BC. So you look at those 2 games, though, last Saturday, they turned into blowouts, but those were the first lopsided conclusions to games that we had seen in the CFL in 2 weeks. Every game before that was a down-to-the-wire, epic, thrilling finish and a barn burner. So it's really been some exciting football the last couple of weeks in the CFL. Before we get to week 12, we'll start with Hamilton, of course, with always the team on the bye week we talk about first. They need the bye week. They got to regroup a little bit. 2 really tough losses to stop the win streak. And I'm a Ticat fan and season ticket holder, and I was very realistic about where the Ticats were 2 weeks ago after they stunned BC on the road and came back from 10 points down to beat the Lions. And at that point, they had improved to 6-2 on the season. I cautioned everybody that was starting to think, plan the Grey Cup parade and get their Grey Cup tickets and their flights booked for Winnipeg, for the Grey Cup game. I'm like, hold on now. Look, we're happy. 6-2, great, for considering how bad a season it was for Hamilton last year. Didn't even make the playoffs. But you have to remember, guys, we beat Montreal without Davis Alexander. We beat Toronto, and we beat Ottawa twice. Like, let's not thump our chest and think this is the unbeatable force here in the Canadian Football League right now. I cautioned a few people that were starting to get a little ahead of themselves, a little carried away based on that 6-2 run that Hamilton, or 6-2 record and the win streak they were on. And sure enough, they've dropped 2 in a row since then going into the bye. The shootout at home, honoring the night they honored Shea Gilgeous-Alexander when they played BC. It was a great game, but BC beats them in overtime. And then last week against the team that I've got number 1 in my power ratings right now, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, no match for them. No match for them. And to me, the impressive part was what Saskatchewan's defense did to that Hamilton offense. It was just incredible to watch. Bo Levi Mitchell was swarmed under pressure. It was not a good day for the O-line of Hamilton. The run game was spotty, and Bo was just off too. And I think the pressure that got to him kind of made his passes inaccurate, where he's just sailing balls over receivers' heads. We haven't seen that much from Bo Levi Mitchell this year. The bad interception in the red zone that he had, just a terrible throw by his standards that took points off the board. Remember, that was recovery of a muff punt by Saskatchewan. Hamilton had a golden opportunity to score there and get right back in the football game as well, and then just couldn't do it. The interception by Bo Levi Mitchell. And at that moment watching it, and I know my buddies that are in my season ticket group agreed, Rob, they felt, that was our chance to get back in it. It's going to be rough, tough sledding now to get back in it and win this game. And sure enough, Saskatchewan pretty much carried the game from that point on. So a very disappointing game. Now, they did have 2 key corners out, or 2 key players in the secondary. I would say it is their 2 best players in the secondary. The cat man, as we call him, Stavros Katsantonis, who has been a phenomenal safety for them the last couple of years, who's multiple interceptions. He always seems to be a good beat on the football from that spot. And then, of course, the veteran in the secondary at the boundary corner spot, Jamal Peters, who also missed that game for Hamilton. So you knew they were going to be a little bit up against it versus Trevor Harris in that passing game, and they hung in there for a bit, but a couple of busts in the secondary, blown coverages, really hurt Hamilton as that game went on, and that's natural. You expect that. With 2 of, like I say, I think their 2 best players in that secondary missed that game last week against Saskatchewan. So the key for Hamilton is, now you're 6-4, but you're still leading the division because Montreal just can't seem to win without Davis Alexander. So you still have a 1-game lead over Montreal for first in the division. You're not scared of Ottawa and Toronto. They stink. So from that standpoint, you're actually in decent shape, Hamilton, even though you lost those two. But I think the big takeaway from that Saskatchewan loss heading into their bye this week, Rob, is that they're not contender level yet. They're not. There's still work to be done. And the work that has to be done is on the defensive side of the football. I'm not worried about the offense. Bad game last week, but I think the offense will be fine. The defense is the concern because they had a few games where they were starting to play a little bit better, but these last few games, the 2 versus BC and then last week, the pass rush, where's it been? The pass rush has not been great. And again, with those injuries in the secondary, can't afford that. And that's going to make a defense that's already got some questions a little bit worse off as well. So, again, good timing for the bye for the Hamilton Ticats, and they have a great chance to bounce right back because they play the lowly Argos. And in Argo Ticat games head-to-head since the start of last season, and this has been Milanovic versus Dinwiddie in the head-to-head coaching battle, Milanovic has swept Dinwiddie in the Argos. They won all 3 regular season games last year, Hamilton, over Toronto. 3-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread. And, of course, they beat him earlier this year in the one previous head-to-head meeting this season in Toronto. So Hamilton has owned Toronto the last couple seasons. Scott Milanovic versus Ryan Dinwiddie, it's been advantage Scott Milanovic. 4-0 straight up, 4-0 against the spread for the Ticats versus the Argos. So hopefully a chance for the Ticats off the bye to get back on track versus a team they've had good success against the last 2 seasons when they play on Labor Day, the annual Labor Day Classic. And that's what I love about the CFL, Rob. You're going to get that standard Labor Day weekend. Every year it's Saskatchewan versus Winnipeg. It's Toronto versus Hamilton, the Ontario rivalry, and Edmonton versus Calgary, the Alberta rivalry. It's the same matchups every year on Labor Day weekend in the CFL. They all call them the Labor Day Classics. And it's always one of the best weekends of the regular season with these traditional rivalries always taking place on Labor Day weekend. So we'll see if Hamilton can bounce back Labor Day weekend against Toronto. But Rob, your thoughts on the Ticats as they enter their bye week?
Yeah, you covered a lot of ground there, Ian, that I agree with. First of all, the interception after the muffed punt that was recovered by Hamilton really was the opportunity to erase a lot of what had gone bad prior to that and be right back in the game. Didn't work out. The pass looked horrible, looked like it was intended for Saskatchewan. But Bo Levi Mitchell, when he's not going well, he's not going well. And certainly Saskatchewan, Corey Mace. I had said this on our good friend Gabe Morency's show last week. To me, Corey Mace, as somebody who has not handicapped the CFL as long as you guys have, maybe the last 5 years or so. But to me, Corey Mace, one of the best head coaches in the league. His decision-making to me is really good. You talked about injuries to Toronto, and I want to bring that point up real quick here because there's a couple of things you hit on that I totally agree on. First of all, when you're handicapping these games, you have to go back through these schedules. And when you go back through the schedules of teams that teams have played, what you find is almost in every case, you can justify a win or a loss because of quarterback injuries in this league. They've been so significant. And then overall injuries have mounted to almost every team in this league. Some worse than others, but there have been key guys out seemingly every week. So important to note that. But for Hamilton, I think the reason for optimism, and again, you hit on this, I think the reason for optimism is the fact that the remainder of the league just isn't that good. Now, we'll see if Winnipeg can, they've started to turn things around. We're going to talk about them in a second, I know, but I'm looking for somebody who's in that overall offensive, defensive, special teams class that Saskatchewan is showing, and you just don't find it at this point in time. I'm going to very quickly, I went to go ahead and pull up my power ratings just so that we can do a fast comparison here, at least let the people know. And obviously it's Saskatchewan and Calgary, right? Those two are the two that we would say at this point are the two best. And then after that, it's been a complete and total crapshoot, which puts Hamilton right in the mix, even if it has to be offensive minded and we're going to outscore you rather than we're going to become a great defense overnight. So they've got a great chance to be a playoff team. I agree the bye week probably came at a real good time after that loss for the Hamilton Tiger Cats.
No doubt, no doubt. And our coach, of course, Scott Milanovic. I still remember Scott from the played in the Arena League, I believe it was, way back in the day, or XFL was one of those. It might have been the Vince McMahon XFL, believe it or not, in the early and I, of course, it's a funny story about Scott Milanovic, and of course, there's a betting show. He actually got suspended when he was a quarterback at Maryland in college in the 90s for having bet on 6 games in those days. That's of course so that was before all this stuff that we're seeing now with the Calvin Ridleys of the world and Jonte Porters of the world, and obviously the closer for Cleveland there, Class A. We had Scott Milanovic in the 90s playing quarterback for Maryland, betting on some of the college games back then. So it's that's always what I remember from Scott too, is he was involved with that for a bit when he was playing QB there in the ACC all those years ago. And of course, his biggest, I think, accomplishment from a coaching standpoint was that Grey Cup he won with Toronto back in 2012, trying to bring Hamilton back to the promised land. And like I said, we still have work to do if we're going to get there. All right, let's get into Week 12. Winnipeg, Montreal to kick off the week on Thursday night. Look at where this line is now. We've got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, 7-point road favorites, 48.5 the total in this game. Obviously, the line has moved significantly. Winnipeg was right around about a 4.5-point road favorite when it opened, all the way up to 7. All a reflection of the Montreal injuries, specifically the fact that, now they're down to their 4th quarterback on the roster. At least he was the 4th quarterback on the roster to start the season, and that's James Morgan. And Jason Moss, head coach, and specifically Danny Machocha, the general manager, they're just scrambling right now. They've signed Cameron Dukes, from formerly of Toronto at quarterback. Earlier this week, they signed Shea Patterson, who most recently was with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So they're just trying to fill the quarterback room because they've run out of quarterbacks really last week, other than James Morgan. But James Morgan will get the start because Dukes just got there, a week or so ago. And Patterson obviously is just arriving this week. So you just can't throw them in there right away, even though they have more starting experience in the league than does James Morgan. But James Morgan knows the offense more. He's been with this team right out of training camp. And he was with them last year too. So there is at least that familiarity for him with the Montreal offense and the playbook. He's going to need all that familiarity and knowledge to help him out because it's obviously a tough spot. And, this was always going to be a tough spot for Montreal because you're starting this guy for the first time. You got a ton of injuries. You're still without Philpott and Mack, 2 of your better receivers. You're still without one of your best offensive linemen and Justin Lawrence. You still have guys out in the secondary, including Marc-Antoine Dequoy, who was really starting to play well before he got injured. There is some good news, at least as far as the secondary is concerned. Fabian Ento will be back here in the secondary, and he's been one of their pretty good players in that pass defense for the Alouettes. And believe me, they will take all the returning bodies that they can get right now with everything that they've been dealing with. So Fabian Ento being back sure does help, no question about that. And there was some doubt that Tyler Snead might miss this game. He was limited in practice early in the week, but he will go, and thank goodness for that because, Tyler Snead and Cole Speaker stand out as 2 of the receivers that, Montreal is going to have to rely on here, and James Morgan in particular. So here's the dilemma now. Winnipeg, it's such a difficult spot for Montreal because not only are they breaking in Morgan, first ever start, and yeah, he did play well later in the game against BC, but the game was out of reach. You got to believe BC's defense was playing a little bit passive there late in the game. James Morgan took advantage of it. It's not just that he's starting his first game and, of course, all the injuries. It's that you were on the West Coast Saturday, and now you're playing on a Thursday back home here in Montreal, and you had one practice day. One. That's it. James Morgan gets one practice session, and that was on Tuesday, to work with the starting offense and try to get some traction and rhythm and cohesion going into his. That's unfortunate. What a brutal time for Montreal to have a scheduling spot like this, where you only have one practice opportunity to get ready for this game. Because most CFL teams during the course of the week, they get at least 2, most of the time 3 practice days. But when you're on a short week like this, Saturday to Thursday, including the West Coast flight back to Montreal, It's just one practice day, and what a terrible time it is to have that. The problem now, though, Rob, with laying 7 with Winnipeg is these second half disasters that we have seen from the Bombers the last couple weeks. Zach Collaros on the offense, great first half against Calgary, and shut down completely in the second half. And they lose that game and blow the big 17-point lead. Last week against Ottawa, same thing. They were moving the ball at home early in that game. The second half, the offense bogs down. They start to struggle. They let Ottawa hang around and hang around and hang around. And even with Drew Brown getting injured and leaving that game, Dustin Crum was able to pick up the slack and play reasonably well. And then, of course, the head-scratcher coaching decision by Mike O'Shea. And I know Sergio Castillo's got a big leg, and he's nailed all those big, long field goals. But at that time of the game with Dustin Crum as the quarterback, you got to say to him, hey, go down the field, whatever, 95, 100 yards on the 110-yard field and beat me. You don't give them the opportunity to have what happened and miss the long field goal. And here's Khalil Pimpleton, who's got that ability to take it to the house on a missed field goal. And sure enough, he did. Ottawa ends up tying the game. Now, they survived, and they ended up winning with the last second field goal, but they nearly blew that game too. So they have had some bad second half performances. I know there's some Bomber fans and the people that cover that team that there's some grumbling about Buck Pierce not being there as the OC and Jason Hogan being the current OC, and the fact that that's a few weeks in a row now where it's like the offense works in the first half, the defense on the other side and the coordinator on the opposition team makes their adjustments, Rob, and Jason Hogan doesn't have a counterpunch. And Winnipeg just seems like their offense gets figured out in the second half, and he doesn't know how to counter that in these games. We've seen that now multiple weeks now from this Winnipeg offense. So that's the problem now with laying 7 on the road. They got to win by margin, and even if they're ahead in this game, they got to hold a lead. They've got to hold a lead if they're going to cover a 7-point margin, 7-point spread like this on the road. So this is a clear stay away game for me. Really, this is the game I really have a tough time with, especially with where the number is right now. I think I would have to lean under with the total 48.5, even though Winnipeg's defense scares me. They're not playing that great. But can James Morgan in his first start with a weakened receiving core exploit it? That's going to end up being the question. And Montreal have been trending under, Rob. We've talked about this, I think, the last time you were on with me. Yeah. It's been a big under team without Davis Alexander until last week. And even last week, you needed that very late touchdown by Montreal, to put that game against BC over the total. So I lean under. I think now it's 7. I'd have to hold my nose and lean Montreal. But the fact of back in the Alouettes here, even with all these points at home, with a first-time starting quarterback and the injuries, it's not an easy leap to make. Rob, what do you think here, Winnipeg, Montreal?
Well, the other option, Ian, and I did take the Winnipeg side here, was just to play Winnipeg first half. They laid 3.5, as you mentioned, and I'll put some numbers to everything you were just talking about.
Those second half collapses and struggles and woes right out of the equation.
Eliminate them from the equation, right? And to your point, I'll put numbers to exactly what you said. Ever since their bye week, they're outscored second half 84-37. That's 47 points. That's 7 touchdowns in 5 games, or in 4 games. Outscored each of the last 3 weeks. There was only 1 week in those 5 where they weren't outscored, and it was 7-6 against Toronto. Otherwise, they're not just getting, outscored. They're getting handled in the second half. Now, the offensive struggles, it's been mentioned time and time again, and he'll probably be back next week. You wonder if Dalton Schoen's reinsertion into the lineup next week will help out those second half struggles. They seem to be able to ride Brady Oliveira as far as they can, and Collaros has been, he's been a little above average. He hasn't been the Zach Collaros that was in MVP or MOP candidacy the last few years. They do add Peyton Logan here this week, a offensive weapon that maybe helps out a little bit, backing up Oliveira in this case. Couple of things. Where Winnipeg's secondary is concerned, last couple of weeks, they've tried to sew things up. It didn't really happen against Ottawa, but last week it looked a little bit better in the secondary. I'm so used to the last 3 years watching a Winnipeg secondary that flies around, that hits everything in sight, that makes plays on the ball. Hasn't been for the most part this year, but it seems like maybe they're getting a little bit of I don't know. I don't know if it's done by patchwork or what, but they're starting to figure out who should be in that secondary and who shouldn't.
Well, remember, they lost Jamal Parker and Terrell Bonds, two of their best corners prior to the Ottawa game. So for Mike O'Shea, this is absolutely a patch it up and find something that sticks kind of secondary right now.
And you would think that tonight against Montreal, the team that really doesn't throw it well at this point in time, top two receivers been out for a while, James Morgan. I'll ask you this too. You can answer me. I'll conclude and then you can answer me. But it doesn't seem to me that there's a heck of a lot of difference between McLeod Bethel-Thompson, the number 2, and James Morgan, the number 4. I mean, I don't even consider that a downgrade. They're basically the same team with either one.
Morgan can probably move around better than Bethel-Thompson.
Absolutely. As could Caleb Evans until he got hurt. So Montreal hung on respectfully last week until it kind of collapsed on them. Late third, early fourth, BC started to put up touchdown after touchdown.
Good, but Rob, you're right. A lot of it was 2-and-out punt, 2-and-out punt, 2-and-out punt syndrome, and the defense just gets worn down. And Nathan Rourke's just in a groove, in a zone right now, and he's going to punish you when that happens.
Yes, that team definitely. Their amount of 450-plus yard games is, I think, 4 in a row now. And Winnipeg's not that offense, but again, just to put it into perspective here, I think what you have to do is play Winnipeg. Winnipeg's still a team that's desperate for W's, and you can't just let these winnable games pass by where the standings are concerned. You know, they had their troubles earlier. They're starting to come out of it a little bit. It's interesting. You would think because they're 3-1 straight up the last 4 that they're actually playing better, but they've been outgained in every single one of those games. So their total yardage is still a minus, but they're finding ways to win games like the last second field goal last week. I think Winnipeg first half is probably the way to go here. I find it hard for Montreal. You even described the travel situation, which isn't good for that team.
No, it isn't. And Winnipeg will not have. That's another thing, too. One thing to watch for, and I don't love what I've seen out of the receiving core lately. It seems like it's Nick Dembski, and he needs a little help, though. And we love Nick Dembski, and he's been outstanding. I can't say enough about Nick Dembski. He's been awesome for Winnipeg. But without Dalton Schoen, who is once again out this week for Winnipeg, they're looking for that next guy to be that just reliable, all-the-time number 2 receiver. Is it going to be Stearns? Is it going to be Carrick Wheatfall? Who is it going to be? Because they're still searching for that next guy because of, they don't have Kenny Lawler anymore, went to Hamilton, Dalton Schoen out. So that's been a bit of an issue with Collaros too, is why his interceptions have gone up, why he's not been nearly as efficient. The receiving core not as depth-laden as it's been in the past.
And real quick, Wheatfall kind of misled us with that opening week performance, didn't he?
Yeah.
You thought, oh, wow, they got another option. He hasn't really been an option since.
No, way too sporadic since then, no question. All right, Friday night football tonight. I love that theme song. And we're going to have Edmonton and Ottawa on Friday night. Edmonton, 3-point favorites, 53.5 the total. So the line's moved already, and I'll just say it right away. Early in the week, I jumped on Edmonton. Minus 120 is what I played on the money line. Now, the money line's gotten away from you if you haven't bet it yet, because the point spread's now -3 and the money line is in the minus 160 range. But I like Edmonton. I like what Edmonton is building, and it's taken Mark Killam, the rookie head coach, a little bit of time to get comfortable. And this team, just some good efforts, but falling short, not able to finish. And we saw that several times, even going back to when Trey Ford was the quarterback. But you can't deny, Rob, since Cody Fajardo has taken over as the starting quarterback, 4-0 against the spread. They covered in tight defeats as underdogs against Saskatchewan and Hamilton, 2 pretty good teams. And then they finally got over that hump where instead of losing these close games, they finally closed it out. A great comeback win against Montreal on the road, a great drive by Fajardo late in that game to give the Elks the victory. And then I thought they built on it last week. It was kind of it wasn't a great start to finish performance, but the key moments of the game, they got stops on Toronto last week. They forced the turnover, obviously, of Nick Arbuckle, which was key when they were in the red zone in the second half. And when they needed points and when they really got it going, and this has been a staple of Fajardo. Maybe he starts out a little slow, but boy, oh boy, he gets better in the third quarter and even better in the fourth quarter. He's become a really good fourth quarter player for Edmonton the last couple weeks. His fourth quarters against Montreal and Toronto in those two victories were very good. And it's what really helped and propelled Edmonton to victory in both those games. I like the way they're trending. And to be honest, I was starting to like the way Ottawa was trending, albeit a weaker schedule, where they beat Toronto, got a much-needed win in that comeback against the Argos, 46-42. And then even last week, no quit, down big at halftime. Winnipeg has had issues allowing teams back into the game, as we documented, but give Ottawa credit. They were able to get back in it, but they end up falling by the Sergio Castillo walk-off field goal at the end. So, tough loss there. Again, the Ottawa Red Blacks. Not to mention the injury report is starting to become a problem once again for Ottawa after they were starting to get some confidence. They beat Calgary, who was in a bad spot. PJ Walker started in that game. And then the win against Toronto, the close loss against Winnipeg. But now the injury's mounting. Drew last week in that game, Crum starts. And week, but now when Dustin Crum and Rob watching Edmonton, if there's a strength on their defense, it's up front. They can get after it. They've been solid at times against the run. Serezna's been a terror lately, getting after the quarterback on that D front for Edmonton. The secondary is where Edmonton's got issues, and you can throw the ball on them. But is Dustin Crum the kind of quarterback to exploit that? And I know he's got good receivers like Justin Hardy and Geno Lewis, but now he loses Braylon Addison, who had just come back. The O-line loses Starzala just when the O-line was starting to get healthy again. And I don't know if he's got the arm and the accuracy to really exploit the weakness of the Edmonton defense, which is their secondary. So I think that's the crux of this handicap and this breakdown of the matchup for me. And I like the momentum of Edmonton right now. So I wouldn't want to lay much more than 3, but I think at 3 or less, it's still Edmonton for me. I'm not Mr. Over, and neither are you, Rob, but I'll tell you this right now. 53.5, I'm leaning hard to the under here. Edmonton's 5-0 to the under. Believe it or not, 5-0 to the under, Edmonton, their last 5 games. And what I've noticed since Cody Fajardo's taken over, defense up front has played better. They've kind of contained the run better, which is key against this RPO run-heavy offense that you're going to see out of Ottawa with Dustin Crum. And on offense, I find with Fajardo instead of Ford, there's not as much big play, down the field, vertical passing, not as much explosiveness, not as much pace, a lot more balanced offense, run and pass, methodical, time of possession, time-consuming drives have been the norm for Edmonton with Cody Fajardo at quarterback. So the pace has slowed down for them, to me, with Cody. And it's helped their defense, too, because they're staying on the field longer on offense. So I think at 53.5, I think there's a good case you can make for the under here in this game. Rob, what do you think for Friday night, Elks and Red Blacks?
Yeah, again, I'm going to agree and side with you on a lot of stuff here. And basically, a lot of times, Ian, game handicaps I'm not going to say 100% of the handicap comes down to it, but a large part of the handicap comes back to who's playing quarterback. And the advantage here is glaring in favor of Edmonton. Again, I'm going to put some numbers to stuff you said because I had these notes and you went ahead and, mentioned them generally. Edmonton, before Cody Fajardo became the quarterback, they were allowing 445 total yards a game. Since he became quarterback, 354, a 90-yard difference in total yards per game allowed. It's crazy, right? Since he became quarterback, when I count turnovers in the CFL, we count turnovers on downs. Fumbles, interceptions, TODs all go into that category. Edmonton, 4 games with Fajardo at quarterback, has committed 4 turnovers total in 4 games, which is way different than what it was with Trey Ford. The pass completion percentage is 72.2% with Fajardo. Again, to your point about more methodical, more technician-like, Cody Fajardo is not going to make the big mistake. He's going to make the obvious play. Stuff that Trey Ford is a little bit different in. As much as I like him, he's more of a big play guy than he is a consistent guy. And it's paid off for Edmonton like crazy. And if you go to yards per completion, even knowing that Trey Ford's the big play guy, Fajardo 10.9 per completion, Trey Ford 10.8. So it's still the same, and maybe because Ford makes more plays with his legs. But all of those numbers just put context into what you were saying and to why I like Edmonton as well. Ottawa's a strange, again, we've talked about injuries a lot during this podcast, Ian, but Ottawa's a team that's been bitten as hard as anybody. As soon as they get something going, it ends with a Drew Brown injury. It's happened multiple times this year now. And then you look at Dustin Crum, and I remember, texting a couple of weeks back, and I'm like, Dustin Crum absolutely blows. But he played a pretty good last couple of drives the last time he was called upon, and, that was okay. But I just don't like him as a starter here. I think you can prep for Dustin Crum a lot easier than you can for Drew Brown. As you mentioned, Ottawa's strength, the fleet of wide receivers that they have with Addison down, that's narrowed. There's just so many reasons, except for home field advantage, which goes to Ottawa here, except for desperation spot that Ottawa's in at 3-7, but so is Edmonton. And if you look, for those who look close at the standings here, Edmonton wins this game, they're right in the mix all of a sudden in that division. So Big game for both. Everything Edmonton has done well correlates to the starting quarterback switch. Again, as much as I like Ford, I can see it. It's they're a different team with Cody Fajardo. I think that'll continue on Friday night.
Yeah, I think so as well. Like I said, I wouldn't want to lay much more than 3, but I think at 3 you can still take Edmonton and expect them to get the job done. And like I said, I lean under with that total. I just think, and look, I will say too, it's been a over series with the Elks and the Red Blacks, but the one under was last year in Ottawa, and actually Drew Brown did play in that game for Ottawa, and it was 20-14. So it stayed way under the total. So like I said, I do think that is an under in this one. I do not think that with this next game. The BC Lions taking on the Toronto Argonauts. We've got BC 3.5-point road favorites, 55.5 the total, and that's where I'll start. I know this is the highest total on the board, and at times I've been a little bit hesitant and leery when we start to get in that 55, 56 range with some of these totals in the CFL, but I'm just going to say it. How the fuck are the Toronto Argonauts going to stop BC in this game with what I've seen out of BC? Like, BC's got some serious offense cooking right now. Nathan Rourke is playing. This is what we thought Nathan Rourke was capable of. It's taken him a while. Last year, it was a parachutes in the middle of the season after his last NFL opportunity goes by the wayside. And all of a sudden, of course, Vernon Adams was still with BC at the time. And, he was going back and forth with Vernon Adams. He never got traction. Of course, he's trying to learn on the fly the BC offense and get that timing and rhythm and chemistry with his receivers. And it just didn't seem like he ever got going last year. And he had struggles as a result. And even earlier this year, there were some ups and downs. But I think now you're seeing the benefit of him being with the team right from the beginning of training camp and what it's meant for the development and the ability of Nathan Rourke. He's been much more fluid. He's been excellent. He's been very tough to bring down. There's been games where they've tried to get a pass rush on him. He breaks out of it, and he can be lethal throwing the ball outside the pocket. And we have seen that time and time and time again. And we know this Toronto defense is miserable. Now, they were, I guess, modestly better last week, but when your highlight of the defense in the last few weeks has given up 28 points in a loss, it's a bad way right now with the Argo defense at this point in time. Another frustrating loss where the defense struggles late in the game, especially. Toronto's got an opportunity to tie it. They end up, Toronto thinks the drive's going to continue with a pass interference penalty, but rightfully so, they overturned it. Ryan Dinwiddie's throwing his headset down. He's had a very angry season. He's just been just very, very frustrated beyond belief. That being said, he took a very different tact post-game last week, where a few weeks in a row he had been saying, hey, we got a bunch of pretenders around here. You got to step up. We're going to start cutting guys. He said that once early in the year. Last week, he actually said, I'm proud of these guys and the effort they gave. They never quit. So he's trying to take a different approach now, Dinwiddie, after that loss last week against Edmonton. But boy, oh boy, Toronto 2-8 right now. They've now lost 3 in a row, 5 of their last 6. They're 0-3 straight up and against the spread their last 3, and a large part of it is the defense has been just terrible. And boy, oh boy, I think they got their hands full with BC, who have scored 33, 41, and 36 in their last 3 games. It's been very impressive to watch this BC offense operate. The receivers are starting to get going, and boy, they've got a lot of them. that can make a difference for this BC Lions team. When you look at obviously Hatcher and you look at Justin McGinnis and you look at Katoy and you don't forget about Barry Hill and Eberhardt, who are guys that can step up as well for this BC team. And then when you get Butler running the football too, James Butler, very, very, and the O-line deserves credit too. They've gotten better as the season's gone on for BC. But as we've always said with Toronto, what's kept them afloat, even with all these losses mounting, and what's kept them competitive in a lot of these games, even though they've lost, is Nick Arbuckle and the offense. And we have seen that. And with all due respect to BC's defense, last week, they're playing a Montreal team that's injuries galore, especially at receiver, down to the third and fourth quarterbacks in that game, Evans and then Morgan. Let's not forget, and they only gave up 18 points, so it makes you think a step in the right direction. But let's also not forget that before that Montreal win, they gave up 38 and 37 points in 2 games against Hamilton, and then 33 points in a loss at home against Trevor Harris and the Riders. And they were carved up by Harris and Saskatchewan in that game. I still remember it. So I think Arbuckle and the Argos can do damage here. Now, this is one of those games where because Toronto's offense is still pretty solid, 3.5 is a tricky number. I got BC split -3, BC with team total on BC, which was 29.5 when I jumped in on it. I think they get 30. I really do. I mean, I just don't see Toronto holding this team below 30. So I split BC with -3 point spread and team total over 29.5. And I also took this full game over 55.5. I know it's a high total, but I will say this. BC, of course, I believe it's now 4 straight games have gone over the total. 3 of those 4 games have had 60s or even 70s in points. And the last 2 meetings in Toronto at BMO Field between the Lions and Argos, we saw 69 and 62 points in those 2 games. Lions versus Argos, the last 2 years they've met here in Toronto. So shootouts both times. So even though it's the highest total on the board, it's highest for a reason, and I still like it up and over the total. Rob, the first game on Saturday, BC, Toronto.
Yeah, it's been simple for me, Ian, and it's been BC team total the last 3 weeks. It'll be BC team total again. It'll probably be full game total as well. And I love the way you prefaced what you said at the end there about total, because it's real easy to quote over-under numbers, such as 5-1 over. You have to put into context what those numbers were. And for BC, we're looking at 55.5, which seems high, right? But as you mentioned, 60, better than 55.5, 70, 79, and 54 last week, which would be under what we're asking to get to this week. But Montreal have a single conversion point and not get a single blew it. So you get to 54 in 6 weeks, 406. Again, you can go back and say there were a couple of defenses in there that you can shred, but they got 514 yards against Saskatchewan. So let's not sell BC short in any way, shape, or form. What they're doing right now, they're doing well because they can balance the offense. They run just enough to be able to throw the ball the way they do. Rourke's mobility, obviously. And you talked about the offensive line. Ian, they've given up only 10 sacks in 358 pass attempts. He's not hitting the ground. If you're only getting sacked once every 36 tries and Toronto doesn't rush the passer real well, then, he's going to have a clean jersey most of this game. They'll score theirs. And, all I can do is reiterate what you said about Toronto. Somehow, some way, with no protection whatsoever and no running game whatsoever. The run game is, basically just for show if you're Toronto, and somehow Nick Arbuckle is able to get this team every single week to 26 or better score-wise. So you have to over here.
26 and better, and obviously last week they only scored 20, but let me remind everybody.
Right.
Fumble in the red zone, sack fumble on Arbuckle. They turned it over. They were going to get points there, and then, of course, they were driving late. They thought they had a PI. It got overturned, and they were driving there. So opportunities for more than the 20 they ended up with.
And there were 404 total yards, which doesn't correlate to 20 points, right? So they've obviously been good offensively. It's really all they have to hang their hat on. And again, as you mentioned, even though he's been pressured a lot, BC, when they brought Matthias back, they thought our pass rush is going to be really good this year. It hasn't been really good. So I think Arbuckle can do his damage. BC certainly should be able to do their damage. They're back in the mix now, BC. I really don't know how good they are overall at this point, Ian, but I know they're as good as it gets offensively. And as far as playoff mix is concerned,
Hamilton of the West. They're very good offensively. Yeah. I still think they're shaky on defensively. I think they're a good team. I don't think they're a contender just yet.
And what it looked like, if you and I had this conversation a month ago, we probably would have said maybe they're not even close to being a contender. They didn't look like it,
no.
But they have the last 5 weeks. So I like every end of this over. I don't know, first half over possibly, but I do think, the CFL has been so second half score heavy this year that you hate to play first half. I'd rather just have it all culminated together and play over 55.5 here for BC in Toronto.
Doubt. Absolutely. Like I said, we should see a good amount of points there in that one. Now, again, I'm looking at the forecast, and I'm actually going to be in Toronto on Saturday, not at the game, but at another event. And I know they're calling for thunderstorms, but I think it's late afternoon, just either right at the end of this game or after it concludes. So I don't think the weather's going to be much of an issue here for this game. All right, we wrap up with, I think, the best game on the card, certainly entertainment-wise, as far as intrigue goes. You've got a battle in the West with Saskatchewan against Calgary, and you can make a case right now. Calgary is second-best team in the West Division, especially as they're starting to get healthier now. Minus 110, both sides, pretty much a pick 'em here in this game. 50.5 the total. This side, I know where I'm leaning, Rob, with this game from a side perspective, but I got to admit, there's one key element that's holding me back. And I'll tell you right now, the side I'm leaning with is Saskatchewan, simply because of the fact that they're playing great, both sides of the ball. We saw what the defense did to one of the best offenses in the CFL last week, Hamilton. Their secondary is excellent, led by Milligan, of course. They're starting to really get pressure up front. They're stopping the run, which they've always done under Corey Mace. They're playing with great confidence. And now they get to see, for the second time this year, the Calgary Stampeders team that has handed Saskatchewan their only loss this season. So you talk about a circled spot on the schedule. You better believe this is it. This is the only team that Saskatchewan's lost to. And it was in that weird turn of events that weekend in Saskatchewan when the Riders and Stamps played earlier this year, where that game was postponed on a Friday night in Saskatchewan due to poor air quality, and they had to come back and play the game Saturday afternoon. And it clearly impacted Saskatchewan negatively more than Calgary because they played their worst game offensively for sure. Trevor Harris and the Riders, they moved the ball at times, but they sputtered and they went for it on third down a couple times, didn't get it. There were a couple of instances where they got stopped on downs by Calgary, but the offense was just not sharp. And then there were a couple of big plays that Vernon Adams hit in the passing game for Calgary, and it was enough to get a 24-10 win in that first meeting for Calgary earlier this year. Saskatchewan would love redemption here in this spot, and I actually still think they're a little bit slightly the better. I mean, Calgary's good. What Calgary's done is unbelievable considering how bad they were last year. But I still like Saskatchewan overall as a team a little bit more, I guess with the exception of the kicker, because I still do worry about Brett Lothar. He's had his issues, and they brought in Cameron Fair, another kicker, in practice this week to kind of push him to say, hey, Brett Lothar, get your shit together. We're bringing in another kicker here to push you a little bit to get more consistent. That is a concern for Saskatchewan, but from all indications, they're revved up, ready to go, and they had a bye week too just recently. So the one concern here for me with taking Saskatchewan, even though I lean hard that direction, is Calgary off the bye here for this game. Dave Dickinson long-term's been very good off a bye week, especially when he's had good teams. Maybe not so much when he had the shit teams the last couple of years, but I know when Bo Levi Mitchell played there, and they were a great team every year, and now he's got a pretty good team again. He's been good with the bye week more often than not, and we saw that earlier this year. They were off a bye. They played Winnipeg at home, and they just beat the living hell out of Winnipeg in that game, start to finish against the Bombers. That's the only hang-up I have with really going gung-ho and with Saskatchewan here in this spot, but I still like them enough to play them in this money line price at minus 110. I like the intangible elements. You got a really good coaching staff in Mace, and Trevor's been on this show during the January months to talk NFL playoffs before. Trevor Harris, that is good, and I talk to him every now and then. He can't say enough about Mark Mueller, his offensive coordinator for Saskatchewan, saying he's done a great job. He seems to be great in these spots where something doesn't go right the first time. He fixes it. He gets the adjustments and corrections the next time, and they're better. You got to believe Mark Mueller. This is where you put some faith in Mark Mueller, because he knows the offense had probably their worst game of the season against Calgary in that first game. What can they do this time? I expect them to be a lot better. Even though the Calgary defense with Bob Slowick, which is a pretty good hire, I got to give credit. Bob Slowick's been around football circles for a very, very long time, and now he's the defensive coordinator for Calgary. They've certainly improved leaps and bounds, but they'll be in tough here against a Saskatchewan team looking for a better offensive showing than in that first meeting. I also gravitate that I think this game could go either way totals wise. Both teams have the defenses to keep it under like in the first meeting, but I'm going to gravitate to the over here, Rob, and here is why. I like the idea of the first meeting being low scoring. The second meeting, I think things change a little bit. Offensive coaching staffs make their adjustment. You got Dickinson on the Calgary side. You got certainly Mueller and Saskatchewan looking for much better than the 10 points they scored against Calgary in the first meeting. That's something to keep an eye on. And these Calgary games here, Rob, at McMahon Stadium, I started to do some digging because I noticed they played 5 home games this year. They're 3-2 to the over in the 5 home games. But I really looked at it closer after that and realized the 2 games for Calgary at McMahon Stadium, their home field that stayed under, you can put an asterisk beside both of them. The Ottawa game at home that stayed under, 20-12 for Ottawa, that was played in a monsoon. It was heavy rain. It was heavy wind. It was a dreadful weather game. And there was just no chance of that game going over the total. And I expected that game to stay under, and it did against Ottawa back on June 21st. The other Calgary home game that stayed under the total was their 23-21 loss at home to Montreal. And if you remember, Vernon Adams left that game to injury. Late third quarter, P.J. Walker takes over, and the offense just did not move the football at all. You know, they just stalled, they bogged down, they stagnated, and Calgary didn't do anything on offense after Vernon Adams left that game, and that's probably why. And then the points just dried up late in that Calgary-Montreal game, not to mention Bethel Thompson, MBT, was the quarterback for Montreal. So you certainly expected that game to slow down once Vernon left the game, and MBT, methodical, not exactly a guy we trust to finish drives, and it stayed under and yet still got to 44 points. Those were the 2 unders. Every other Calgary home game's gone over this year. The Hamilton game, 64 points. The Winnipeg game, 53 points. And then, of course, the other Winnipeg home game 2 weeks ago, 55 points in that game, 28-27. And they've scored 24 or more points in those 3 home games, aside from those 2 that I have an asterisk beside, the Ottawa game and the Montreal game that stayed under. So I think Calgary, we can count on them. Even the scary part is Saskatchewan's defense is cooking right now. But with Calgary getting Damian Alford back, we know him well, that rookie receiver. He's back this week, and he was lighting it up in that passing game for Calgary before he got injured. That's huge. It stretches the field. He's a big play receiver. He's already established that. I think that's huge for the Calgary offense. They're starting to get some of their other receivers back. Clark Barnes returned from injury prior to the bye. And then I think for Saskatchewan, when you look at it, yeah, they might still be missing Emelis, but there's all kinds of guys that have stepped up for them at receiver. There's no question. Duncan Busby and Joe Robustelli, and look at Tommy Neal last week getting a touchdown for them against Hamilton. So I think they'll move the ball a little bit here against this Calgary defense. So I'm good. And in a game where I think you can make a good case for the over and a good case for the under, I'm just going to choose to make a little bit of a stronger case for the over here at 50.5. And the weather's supposed to be just dazzling for football Saturday night in Calgary. It's the game of the week on paper, Rob, for week 12. What do you think, Saskatchewan, Calgary?
Well, I think I would make the case for the over, Ian, based on that first game. That was 24-10. How about 976 total yards in that game? It just, again, it doesn't correlate to 35. It's the most total yardage in any Calgary game this year and any Saskatchewan game this year, 976. These 2 teams combined to go 2 for 6 in the red zone where TDs are concerned. 4 opportunities let go. For Saskatchewan, You were talking about Mueller maybe correcting what went wrong. Well, the run game went wrong, right? I mean, you have AJ Ouellette and you rush for 16 yards, or he rushed for 16 yards. I think 96.3% of their total yardage that day, Saskatchewan came through the air. There was a ton of passing yardage, 826 yards through the air in that game. And they're good defenses, right? So they found a way to move the football on each other. Again, just to throw numbers out there, for the Saskatchewan side, if you take their points to total yards, it took them 43 yards of total yardage just to get a point in that game. That's a ridiculous number. You shouldn't have to go almost half the field to get a point. So that's all likely to change here. If I was going to look toward a side, I would probably slightly lean Calgary because they've had the extra week. 2 weeks to get ready for this team. You beat them the first time, as you mentioned, under strange circumstances, to say the least. But with 7 turnovers in that particular game, I mean, a lot of things could have gone either way. So I think it was pretty evenly matched statistically, other than the fact that Calgary just ran the ball so much better than Saskatchewan did, which is not really a quality of Saskatchewan to not be able to run the ball when you think of Ouellette. The defensive side of the ball for both, again, as you mentioned, you could make a case for under, but sometimes the matchup just designates where you go with the game, right? The matchups were the matchups. And Saskatchewan had 6 sacks last week, but I don't know that you get to Vernon Adams the way you got to the 2 quarterbacks last week, right? It's just a different ball game. So for me, I think over has to be a play just based on what we saw in week 1. These two teams moved it at will against one another. Bad situations, no red zone points, a boatload of turnovers when you're moving the football. It just, a lot of things suggest that game should have gone into the mid-50s, if not higher. So I'll try my luck with that this time around.
That's a great stat about the total yardage in that first meeting. You're right. It equates to way more than 34 total points that we ended up seeing in that first Riders Stamps game in Saskatchewan earlier this year. And like I said, I just like the situation where Calgary's getting a lot of their skill position guys back, including the biggest one, of course, is Damian Alford. It goes without saying. We saw what he was doing with VA in the passing game before his injury. You know, multiple big play, quick strike touchdowns. He stretches the field. He's tough to, deal with one-on-one in that secondary of the opposing team. Hopefully we see a few Moose calls, his nickname, Moose Alford there, and they'll get that going again when he scores the touchdown. I loved seeing that when he was scoring those big touchdowns earlier this year for Calgary. So we're on the same page there. I think we flip-flop. We see under the first meeting, and this one goes over the total. All right, we've also got college football starting Saturday. Can't wait. Excited about it. We will go a little brisker pace with these 4 games, but we will still get to all 4 of them here for week 0. We'll begin in Dublin, Ireland here. Oh, Lord, love a duck. Irish mashed potatoes. Oh, Lord, love a duck. There's my Irish accent right there, my attempt at it. Iowa State and Kansas State in Dublin. 3-point favorites, the Kansas State Wildcats, 50.5 the total. How about the season starting with a Big 12 conference game? Pretty good stuff right there, and important for 2 teams that have aspirations of at least contending for a Big 12 championship. When you look at this meeting, the first thing that stands out is head-to-head. We know for years it's been Matt Campbell for Iowa State. It's been Chris Kleiman for Kansas State. And what have we seen in the head-to-head matchup? Well, believe it or not, Iowa State 4-1 straight up, 5-0 against the spread, head-to-head versus Kansas State. So Iowa State has certainly had the better of it in this head-to-head matchup. You look at what we're seeing here with these teams. Obviously, Rocco Becht, who I thought improved as a QB last year, is back for Iowa State. Chase Hansen, the running back. Very interesting that for Iowa State, defensive line, there's some question marks for them coming into the year. Kansas State's always a team looking to be balanced. They don't want to throw it 30, 40 times. They do want the run game to be a component. Might be able to have some success doing that against Iowa State. Meanwhile, on the other side, you've got Kansas State. Avery Johnson, I've seen a lot of social media posts, him working in these quarterback academies and all this stuff to try to perfect and just improve his pocket passing and his accuracy, which is the next step Avery Johnson has to make at quarterback for Kansas State. For them coming into the season, I think, they're going to be looking to run it. And again, with some turnover in personnel on the defensive line for Iowa State, could they have success? They could. But on the flip side, Kansas State, their defense, their weakest point is for sure the secondary. And, you have been able to pick on Kansas State as far as throwing the football. Will Rocco Becht have that success here in this game? Because I don't know if they're going to have a ton of opportunity to run the football. I think K-State can be pretty stout up front against the run in this game. But the secondary is my concern when it comes to K-State. One of the things I looked at you have to when you're talking about Dublin, Ireland game is the weather. And all week long, I've seen the weather going to be solid, actually. Dry, not much precipitation, if any. I don't see wind being a big problem at Aviva Stadium. Footing at times has been an issue with this field and this surface in Ireland. But looks like the weather's going to be okay. I mean, I have not a strong opinion on this game, but it is the first game of the year. I don't want to say pass, so I'll throw out that I lean. Certainly, series history at 3 or more, I could only look at the Cyclones. They've just had the better of it, and I usually like Campbell as a dog. That being said, I like a lot of pieces of Kansas State coming into the year. Reports are Johnson's ready to improve as a quarterback, and I'm mildly interested in, and I know these games have started off very slowly in Ireland as far as points are concerned. I'm mildly interested in the full game over, and I would only look full game over because I could see this being a game where it starts off slow as far as points and then maybe opens up in the second half. And you're going to need efficiency on both sides to trump pace because neither team's going to play at a fast clip, and both teams are probably going to commit to running the football a lot. But I like what both offenses could be capable of here. Knowing Iowa State's a little bit, questionable on the D-line to start the year, and knowing Kansas State still has some holes in their secondary. So a mild lean to the over 50.5, but I'd be lying if I told you I had a super strong opinion on this game. But a great one to watch and a great one to start the season with. Rob, what do you think here? Iowa State, K-State.
Yeah, I waited around. I had an opinion early on this game, Ian, but you wait around for that first hurdle to clear. And you mentioned it. It's the weather. Every year in this game, we see rain, miserable conditions. And here we're going to get 68 degrees, no rain. So once on Monday, when I saw the weather report, the look-ahead weather report, I went ahead and played over. I've got a fairly solid stance on the over here. And it's for, I'm a matchup guy. I'm a fundamental guy. And the matchups that you described, each side can exploit the other where that's concerned. Iowa State's 110th against the run last year, and really not a bunch of improvement on paper. We never truly know right off the bat. We know what we know on paper. We know the personnel that we know. But for K-State, when you add in the running dimension of Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards, who was hurt a little bit last year, their star running back, and I would not overlook the backup here, Joe Jackson, who had to come in. And, you're a music guy, not the stepping out or is she really going out with him, Joe Jackson, but Joe Jackson, the running back here. He was phenomenal between the tackles and outside breakaway threats. So they've got two really good backs. They've got a quarterback that you have to prepare for. And I get that when you have your opening game, you have the entire spring and summer to prepare for that one team. So Iowa State will do what they do, but there's a lot of turnover. Lost 4 key members of that defensive line to the NFL draft with the transfer portal. You're rebuilding stuff early on against a team that can do something really well. That's tough. Other side of the coin. That Kansas State secondary, absolute mess at this point in time. That secondary opens up with 4 new guys in their top 5. You just don't know what you're going to get out of them. I don't think they know what they're going to get out of them. The drawback, if you wanted to counter, would be, hey, you know what? Rob, Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel play for the Texans now, and that's 2,200 yards worth of receptions last year for Iowa State. However, like all teams that have vacancies nowadays, you go to the portal and you pick, and generally these poor non-power 4 conferences are the ones that get picked on, so where does Iowa State go? They go to UCF, they go to East Carolina, they get a couple of home run threats from those 2 teams and incorporate them. And I think that with Rocco Becht, that quarterback, Iowa State's way more system based, than a lot of passer offenses. In other words, plug and play type of deal. Do you have the same type of attributes as Noel? Noel and Higgins were proven. These guys likely to show us that they can be proven as well. So I see one side being able to throw the football, and we know football is a game of balance. Once you can do one thing, you can basically do the other. Once K-State can run, they'll be able to throw. Avery Johnson, because it's such a pet peeve of mine, and you got on it a little bit, but If this guy could just complete the gimmies, Ian, forget about the spectaculars. He's such a good athlete, but if he could just complete the 8-yard slants without overthrowing it by 5 miles. He reminds me so much of Marcus Mariota when he played at Oregon.
That's good.
A lot of numbers.
Simple throws are the ones they'll just miss or overthrow or underthrow or throw it behind somebody. Absolutely. Yep.
And gain a lot of accolades because of the athletes that they were, right? Mariota was a great runner in college too, dual threat. So between him and Drew Aller, I don't know which one I like the least at this point. All right, the one that I wish would improve the most, but I think Avery Johnson can get the job done here. This game, to me, I got 49.5 because it's been pushed up since people have seen the weather report, but 51 always the key in college football. So I think it gets to 51. You could convince me that this game gets to 27, 24, one way, shape or form, in some way, shape or form. So I played it over 49.5.
Yeah, I think I definitely lean in that direction. And like I said, I think you're not gonna get the pace, but this is a game where I think efficiency can trump pace, and the ability to finish drives can supersede. The fact both teams play pretty methodically on offense, which may not be the case with this next game we're going to talk about. And I did at least. I know when I had Rob on weeks ago, and we went through college football, and we had to say a little something about every division in the NFL and every conference in college football. I know the little something I said in Conference USA was this game specifically being high scoring. And I still see it being that way. Sam Houston State, Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky, 10.5-point favorite, 61 the total. It's first of all, Phil Longo, head coach, North Carolina, Wisconsin OC before that. This has been a run-heavy, slow-paced, very methodical, very, I don't want to say dull offense because they were solid in doing what they did under Casey Keeler, but they're going to look to be more explosive. They're going to look to throw the football more, at least be a lot more balanced and throw the ball more and play a lot faster, this Sam Houston State offense. Now, the question is their quarterback here, Hunter Watson, going to be able, to play this style of offense and throw the ball more because he's not known to be a great, efficient pocket passer, but they're going to try and they're going to play fast. And I think they're still going to run the ball a decent amount, but it's certainly going to be much closer to 50-50. It's not going to be heavily skewed to the run game like it was in the Casey Keeler era here at Sam Houston State. And when you look at Western Kentucky, their defense at times last year against the run was hit or miss. So there's some opportunity for Sam Houston, even with the scheme change. My one concern is it takes time to get this offense really rolling, but you're going to get a lot of plays, that's for sure, because they're going to speed up the tempo here in this game. And I still have enough questions about Western Kentucky on defense. And from what I'm reading, there were some questions about, they do have 3 offensive line starters back to Sam Houston, which helps. But from what I'm reading, Rob, they like their receivers, even though a lot of them are transfers. They like Quavez Humphreys. They like Michael Phoenix. They like some of these guys they brought in. So we'll see how much of an impact they can make in this throw the ball a little bit more, faster-paced offense that Phil Longo is bringing here to Sam Houston. What I really think helps this over is the other side of this matchup, where Sam Houston's defense is totally starting from scratch. And I mean totally. You're talking about I've got 16 of their top tacklers gone from last year. And it was a great Sam Houston defense. Not to mention they've got a new, obviously, defensive coordinator this year, no question, and Freddie Autry-Lindsay. And don't forget the guy that was there before for Sam Houston. He's now the defensive coordinator for North Texas. And this guy took pretty much the majority of that Sam Houston defense and those players with him to North Texas. And this is a starting from scratch, starting completely over Sam Houston defense. And I think they're going to struggle immediately. And what really hurts them in this matchup is the team they drew, the opponent they drew in this first game. Because we know with Tyson Helton here at Western Kentucky as head coach, he's in the past, he's wanted to throw the ball, and this has been a very pass-heavy, great quarterback program going back to the Jeff Brom days. Not so much last year. They struggled offensively for a good chunk, way more than we expect from the Hilltoppers. But I think they get back to that. Lightning fast pace, super hyper tempo, and they've got a great situation to hit the ground running. Not only a totally rebuilt defense, rebuilding on the Sam Houston side, but Western Kentucky brings in a very much hyped, ballyhooed quarterback and offensive coordinator tandem in Maverick McIver at quarterback and Rick Bowie, the offensive coordinator from Abilene Christian, where they put up just monster numbers and lit up the scoreboard weekly in the FCS last year. And now they bring that offense and that air raid and that very, very extreme tempo offense here to Western Kentucky, and a chance to really feast on a Sam Houston defense, right away that's starting over. And you've got that continuity and familiarity. Maverick McIver's taken the field knowing that playbook top and bottom, because the OC he had with him at Abilene Christian is now with him here at Western Kentucky. So I expect pretty good things here from this Western Kentucky offense. I like this over, even with the move up a little bit. It was in the high 50s at one point, 60. It's gone to 61, 61 and a half, 62. I saw earlier in the week too. So I like over the total, no doubt in this game. I think we'll see plenty of points. And even if there's times where the offenses kind of stall at times, there's going to be a lot of plays. And, so what I would say is don't panic if it's like late second quarter and it's 14-10 at the time or something like that, because you're going to still get a lot of plays and a lot of possessions in this game and a lot of opportunities for those points to pile up, especially as the game goes on. But yeah, I like the over here. So Rob, what do you think? Sam Houston State, Western Kentucky.
Yeah, possessions will be no problem. Ian, snaps will be no problem. Even if you find 3 and outs, these 3 and outs here take 49 seconds, so you're not grinding clock in any way, shape, or form. I think the Western Kentucky side correlates to over. I think over is the best play in this game for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. And we've seen, in the words of Dave Chappelle, I've seen this one before. We had at Western Kentucky, Zach Kitley bring Bailey Zappi from Houston Baptist, and that offense went through the roof. And now you get the same thing. You described it. Rick Bowie brings Maverick McIver, and here we go all over again with that type of offense. And you're going to see it at FAU, because now Zach Kitley took Western Kentucky's quarterback Caden Velkamp with him. So FAU has the same situation. You love these types of deals where OC comes from, the Southland, where they just run plays on top of plays on top of plays and play wide open offense, especially against rebuilding defenses. And as you mentioned, in the case of Sam Houston, new coaching staff, familiarity with the systems, very little, especially on a defensive side. So, the Western Kentucky defensive situation, you described it, it's not very good either. So Sam Houston probably gets the edge. If you ask me, if 41-24 is very reasonable, that's mid-60s. We're asked to get to 63 here. There's always a difference between getting, low 60s and then, into the upper 60s. You need that probably one more touchdown, but I don't see the problem getting it here. It's an offense that, for what it's worth, won't take its foot off the pedal. And these teams only know how to play one way. You know what I mean? A lot of times we see, and this, but I'm talking for folks who may not, end of game. Well, maybe they, throttle it down. But Western Kentucky is not the type of team to throttle it down. Sam Houston will play in chase mode, and they'll keep going. So to me, Ian, it's pretty self-explanatory here. The over should be the right play in this game.
All right, I lean Western Kentucky. I don't know about laying 10.5. I'd prefer a team total rather than laying the 10.5. I'd definitely, if I'm playing Western Kentucky side, I'd prefer the team total over as opposed to laying the 10.5, because I do still have some questions about that Hilltoppers defense. All right, Fresno State, Kansas. Kansas 13-point favorites, 50.5 the total. Kansas opening up their brand new stadium for their home games for Jayhawks football. It's been under construction for a while. That's why they were displaced and had to play at Arrowhead Stadium a lot last year. In Kansas City. Now they're back home with their brand new stadium opening up. Very excited about it. I think that probably enhances the home field edge that maybe Kansas will have for this game. But I got some hesitancy, serious hesitancy, asking this team to win by 2 touchdowns or more. Not a great favorite last year was Kansas, laying bigger points. There are still some question marks that I have, and I like Lance Leipold. Rob probably agrees. I mean, he's done a great job. There's no denying that. Kansas was in an absolute, toilet, really, when he took it over initially. But what he's been able to get out of Kansas, it's been impressive to see the improvements, albeit, a little step back last year because of that bad start. They did have a strong finish. Jalen Daniels is back, of course, at quarterback. And, his season kind of mirrored the team last year, kind of up and down to start. But, boy, started to play much better toward the end of the season, no question. But I am concerned. Jeff Grimes, the OC, has gone to Wisconsin. You've got basically Jim Zabrowski, Matt Lubbock, going to take over in a co-coordinator role here at Kansas. Devin Neal, who is the all-world running back for this Kansas team, is no longer there. But they still like their backfield with LaShawn Williams, but still 3 new starters on the offensive line. Receiving corps has been decimated in the offseason. A lot of new faces there. Is that unit and is the receiving corps and the timing with Daniels going to hit the ground running right away? That remains to be seen. And then on defense, there's transition because DK McDonald is a brand. So coordinators on both sides of the football, brand new for the Kansas Jayhawks, and only a few starters back on that defensive side of the football. Now you could say, hey, defense stunk for a lot of last year for Kansas. Wasn't very good, but still there's a lot of questions and concerns that I have for Kansas on defense coming into the year. I like the hire that Fresno made. Matt Entz comes from winning culture, North Dakota State FCS ranks. Years ago was the head coach there, defensive-minded head coach, and they have made no secret leading up to this game. We're going to just try to take the air out of the game, bleed the clock, slow-paced, methodical, run the football some more. And it'll be interesting to see how that works. They're going to use, that 12, 13 personnel with the multiple tight end sets and just really, really enforce the run in the football early and often this year on offense and take pressure off E.J. Warner, who transfers over from, of course, times at Temple and tenures at Temple and Rice to be the starting quarterback. And I get it. E.J. Warner was a disappointment in those 2 stops. No question. I think we all expected a little bit more from him, especially the son of the legend Kurt Warner. But at the same point in time, there's people saying E.J. Warner's hopeless, that he's not going to be able to get better and improve and find himself in a situation that probably helps him out. And I'll say this, it's not like he's coming from a winning pedigree there. Temple and Rice have had issues, to say the least, the last few years. You move to Fresno. They've always been one of these steady, consistent, Mountain West programs. He's in a system where they're going to run the football. They're not going to ask to put everything on his plate. And I like that they've got an offense around E.J. Warner where it's going to help him out. It's not going to be him having to carry the day for Fresno State. And I think that will help because, you see some of those numbers with E.J., Rob, and it's like, geez, sub 60% completion some of these years for E.J. Warner. It's like, holy shit, he just hasn't played as well as we thought. But I think he's in a situation to have better success, knowing they're going to be able to run the football and knowing they're going to run the football a lot of rush attempts, and knowing that Kansas team on defense only has 3 starters back. It's concerning to me that, Fresno might be able to have some success running the football here in this game. And even if they just gradually move the chains, we'll see how efficient they can be when they get in the red zone. But if they can gradually move the chains, 13 becomes a big number to play. And Kansas never plays fast on offense either. We've known that under Leipold. So I like Fresno in the 13 here. I think they can do enough to hang around. And like I said, Kansas, I'm going to have to see it, that they can cover as double-digit chalk. Not a point spread role that I'm overly ready to trust them in, especially with the receiving core that's brand new, questions on defense with only 3 starters back, losing Devin Neal, who meant so much to that offense, 3 new starters on the O-line. You catch my drift here that there's enough questions, for me at least, with Kansas to have real doubt about wanting to lay 13 with them here in their first game, even with the stadium situation and that being a nice little boost. I'm sure they'll be excited to open the new stadium, but that doesn't make me thrilled to lay 13 with Kansas here in this spot. Rob, what do you think here? And I lean under because I think both teams will play. I mean, this is a stone cold under in this game if you're betting it simply based on pace, because I think both teams are going to be playing that slower pace and it could stay under as a result. But Rob, what do you think here? Fresno State, Kansas.
Yeah, I think for me, the bigger problems lie on the Fresno State side. I always hate these 360-degree polar opposite switches. You go from Fresno under Jeff Tedford with Mikey Keene, you're throwing it all over the lot, and then you're going to bring – we've seen it before, right? Craig Bohl took over Wyoming from North Dakota State, hit the brakes. Chris Kleiman took over, and Chris Kleiman, to his credit, has somewhat softened his state. They still want to be a predominantly run team, but they do throw it a little bit. They go for the jugular, but at times, and he's got more talent. But these North Dakota State head coach, you got to recruit an entirely different athlete for this. I just don't know that they can build a good enough offensive line to say that we're going to grind out first downs. especially against a team that can load the box against that and know, well, this team's no threat to throw whatsoever. E.J. Warner, his best asset is probably his passing ability. At Temple, he was running for his life forever. And at Rice, they couldn't run the ball to help him out. So to your point, if they could play some type of complementary football, maybe we could get the best E.J. Warner. But offensive lines take the longest to develop. You're going into a Big 12 venue where it's going to be frenzied, where the other team has the better athletes, the bigger, the faster, the stronger. It's kind of tough for me to see Matt Entz putting things together the way he wants them to look immediately against this type of opponent for Fresno. And there's probably a payday involved here for them, but you probably would have rather seen them open up with a couple of cupcakes and try and get things organized first. That being said, I'll tell you, Ian, from what I've heard, coming out of KU, Jalen Daniels, so turnover prone first 6 games of the year last year, right? And then you talked about it, second half of the year, he played well. But apparently his problems were with Jeff Grimes, the offensive coordinator, which is why he's no longer there. Prior to Jeff Grimes, and this will be his 3rd coordinator in 3 years, right? Because Andy Kotelnicki, again, another highly respected OC, was the guy before. And apparently Daniels liked his style better, which is why now they're under the guidance of Zabrowski, and we'll see. But apparently Daniels during summer camp and spring camp and summer camp has been much, much happier with the way the offense is going to be run this year. Whether or not that correlates into Jalen Daniels' results from a couple of years ago and the last 6 games of last year, we'll have to see. But he is going against an upstart defense, learning a new defensive system. And there's a lot of reasons to think that Fresno might be the weak link in this game. However, 14 points to win the game by could be a lot. Depending upon how many bad situations E.J. Warner and the Fresno State offense get into, you might see defensive made scores here for Kansas, points where they set the offense up at point blank range or points where they score them themselves. I think if I had to play, and I haven't, I would play Kansas. But to your point about this being a potential stone cold under, I would agree with that. I just don't know where Fresno's points are going to come from. The early money has bet it that way. They bet it down from 51.5 down to 50.5. I kind of see, you could get me to believe in something like 31-10 Kansas in this game.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's certainly possible that it's one of these, like a 23-10. Yeah, exactly. 28, 28-17 kind of game. Even then, that stays under the total, 45. So, yeah, and again, neither team's going to play ultra fast either. That's something to keep an eye on here as well. Hey, it's Tim Brando calling this game on
there you go.
on Saturday. There we go. Tim Brando and his new partner. It used to be Spencer Tillman all those years. It's Devin Gardner now, who he worked with for the first time last year. So they're doing that. It's Dave Pasch and Dusty. That's who ESPN is sending out to Ireland for Iowa State and Kansas State. So they didn't put Fowler and Herbie on that one. They gave it to Dave Pasch and Dusty Dvoracek there for the Ireland opener. So there's your announcers for those that are interested, and I always am. All right, final game, Rob, Stanford and Hawaii. This game is on CBS on Sunday. Now, this one I've heard conflicting reports. I've heard Rich Waltz and Robert Turbin might be calling it on, because this is a CBS game, not CBS Sports Network. This is CBS, like the main CBS on Saturday. I've also heard that it might be the lead crew, Nestler and Gary D. They might even be sending those guys out there to call this one in Hawaii. But Hawaii 2.5-point favorites, 50.5 the total. This is Gary Danielson's last year. And you and I, Rob, we're old enough to know how long Gary Danielson's been announcing in college football. I know there's some people on Twitter that would have wanted him retired 5-10 years ago if you listen to some of those SEC fanatics. But nevertheless, this is his final year. He's retiring at the end of this year and then giving the role to Charles Davis, who's actually going to move from NFL to college football for CBS to be with Nestler starting next year. But yeah, Gary D's long run comes to an end this year. Stanford, Hawaii, it's pretty ugly for Stanford. I'll be the first to admit. And, defense was a sieve last year where they gave up 36 points per game. They didn't do anything well on defense. No pass rush, couldn't stop the run, shredded in the secondary. It was the whole gamut of problems for this Stanford Cardinal team. It's been, and of course, doesn't help that they're in the ACC. They got to make all those long travel situations, and now they got to start the year on the island. So not an easy situation here. Of course, they dismissed Troy Taylor with the alleged abuse in the program, and then of course taking over is Frank Reich. This is clearly an Andrew Luck general manager of Stanford Cardinal hire, his old buddy Frank Reich here. And the one thing I will say for Stanford is they are choosing the longtime journeyman quarterback who's at Oregon State previously. Ben Gulbranson is going to be the quarterback here, and there's nothing about him that excites me or makes me think he's going to take this offense to the next level, especially with O-line concerns. And I think the skill position group is extremely weak for Stanford here as well. But I will say this, and even Gabe, when I recorded the show with him on Wednesday, mentioned this. The one thing Gulbranson does have at his disposal as a positive is the quarterback brain power in this program. He's got Reich. He's got Andrew Luck. That's a nice starting place to help your quarterback out. There's no question. But at the same point in time, you got to have the O-line. I'm not sure Stanford does. You got to have the skill position weapons. I'm not sure Stanford does. And I just don't see a lot of – I'm going to have to see it before I believe it as far as projecting immediate success for Stanford on the offensive side of the football, especially when you start to look at Hawaii's defense and how they played down the stretch last year at times, and how they, there were times when, look, they've already improved significantly, in my opinion. Hawaii defense 2-3 years ago couldn't stop anybody. Last year we saw some improvement. All their numbers got better, points per game, yards per game allowed. We saw tangible improvement from Hawaii's defense. And now I'm reading stuff that could be the best Hawaii defense in years, if not the last decade, possibly this year, that Timmy Chang is going to have at his disposal. So I have some serious questions about how much success Stanford's going to have here on the island against, what could be one of the better Hawaii defenses we've seen in quite some time, no question. And I don't want to be a prisoner of facing Utah State and New Mexico when I watched this kid play last year, and those were horrible defenses last year, Rob. You know that, New Mexico and Utah State, and that's who Hawaii played at the end with Micah Alejado at quarterback. But nevertheless, he was great. Now, it was bad defenses. We have to temper our enthusiasm a little bit, but he did play very well in those games. And again, in that New Mexico game, he was splendid, 470 yards, 5 touchdowns in that game. It looks like maybe Chang finally has a quarterback that's really going to be the best for this team, no question about it. Like I said, last year, the improvement, that they started to show on defense with Dennis Thurman as the defensive coordinator. You could see the impact and a positive it was making. I mean, I think the one thing that kind of concerns me is I don't know if I've seen anybody really liking Stanford in this game, because I'm in the camp where I like Hawaii too. But my one concern is this, Rob, and it's I can't get UCLA versus Hawaii last year to start the year out of my mind, when it looked like a very similar situation setting up. You got a bottom rung team, Power 4 that is, coming in to Hawaii. Hawaii's got a big moment here, national TV game like it was last year, that opener against UCLA. And Hawaii, couldn't gain separation. They led most of the game. UCLA comes back and beats them at the end, 16-13. And I worry about that a little bit here with Hawaii favored. Hawaii is a dog. I'm really interested in them. Now they're laying 2.5, and they got to win this game. And we saw them fall by 3 against a UCLA team that didn't turn out to be all that great last year. Now they did play a little bit better down the stretch, the Bruins, but they certainly weren't a team anyone was excited about going into last year. They still went to Hawaii and beat Hawaii 16-13. And it feels that way with Stanford. Nobody likes Stanford going into this year. Why would you? It's a tough situation. But Hawaii fumbled the opportunity at home against UCLA last year. Do they do that again? That's my one pause here in really going hard toward the Hawaii side. What do you think here, Rob, for Saturday night, Stanford, Hawaii?
Well, I bucked the money here in this one, Ian, and I waited, and I got what I was looking for. The total came down below the key number of 50.5. The Hawaii side, I never really had a concern about. So many reports I read over the course of spring and summer about the Hawaii run and shoot, where this is Timmy Chang's 4th year and has the receiving room he finally wanted, the protection he finally wanted, and the quarterback that he finally wanted. And it's all come together really, really well as far as, reportedly it's come together really, really well. We'll see it on the field. You mentioned we got to see it on the field a couple of times last year against weak defenses. Stanford, for what it's worth, was an absolute miserable pass rush team last year. Do you just, they went out and they hit the portal hard. They had to. But I don't know that they developed the kind of pass rush necessary against a run and shoot, which gets rid of the ball quickly. So I think Hawaii's going to have their way offensively. And I can make the case that Stanford, if necessary, can get themselves to 20 points in this game simply based on there's nothing for Hawaii to have any knowledge of what they're going to do here. Hawaii has no game tape on this. It's a pro-style coaching staff coming in. One thing I know about Frank Reich and what's been brought in here on an interim basis, and again, I'll go on a little bit of a soapbox rant, but it amazes me, Ian, how many people in our industry that just have no clue about the situation at Stanford. I mean, do some research, learn something. But for what it's worth, he's an interim head coach just because they had to scramble in April, right? Spring practice was about to start. The hiring of Troy Taylor wasn't something that was done at the end of season, which is when most head coach firings are done, and you have somebody in line. Andrew Luck had to scramble, asked Reich for a favor. Reich said, I'll come do you a favor, but I don't want it long-term. So they're still looking. But Reich is going to take the offense that Troy Taylor left, not totally dismantle it, but add some pro-style concepts in and try and make this a somewhat of a balanced offense, hybrid attack. But Hawaii has no knowledge of what they're going to be on the field. Zero. In that respect, if you take it and combine the fact that Stanford has what a lot of people believe is an elite, nationally elite tight end room, how many offenses just move the ball simply by handing off and throwing to tight ends in college? Nobody guards the tight end in college. Look at the tight ends that are getting drafted here into the NFL within the top 12 picks because nobody guards that position. So I think Stanford, for what it's worth, athletically, they're probably still going to be the superior team to Hawaii just because of who they can recruit and who Hawaii can recruit. But I think the speed and the precision of that run and shoot offense is going to be dangerously difficult for Stanford to guard here early on, especially learning a little bit of a new defensive system. 51 points, I just don't see that as being that big of a barrier here for these two to cross. I would lean Hawaii, certainly. I would have in the back of my mind what you have. Listen, Hawaii under Deshaun Foster wasn't very good at all, and they were very tentative last year, and they still won the game. But to me, 51 points just doesn't even come into question here. Hawaii probably finds their way to 30. We'll see if Stanford, if their offensive line is strong enough to open up some holes in the tight end group and whatever, and if they catch Hawaii by surprise. The team that gets Stanford second has the better deal because they'll have a game's worth of tape to watch this team, and maybe Stanford gets crushed from there. But if they have an opportunity at all this season to be successful offensively, I would think it would be against this team, which is a group of five or group of six, whatever you want to call it, type defense, no matter how much better they are as compared to previous Hawaii editions. 20 points out of Stanford, I have to believe it's going to get there, probably a little more. So I played over 50.5.
All right, the total 50.5. And I'm
one more thing, Ian. I'll just say one more thing for those. We're so used to watching Hawaii, somehow trying to find a way to watch Hawaii at midnight Eastern time, right? Somehow we get those Hawaiian announcers. They're funny to listen to.
7:30 p.m. Eastern on the East Coast this game. That's 2:30, actually. Early afternoon on the island. Yep. And
so what it brings is 86-degree weather on this day with mid-50s humidity. And that's not Northern California weather, not what Stanford practices in. I mean, the old quote, the coldest winter ever spent was a summer in San Francisco, right? You watch Giant games and you see people with parkas on in July. So Stanford, second half, Ian, if they are a bit depth shy in the trenches, Hawaii with their pace could wear them out for sure and score even more second half. So it was another reason why I bet over.
There you go. Exactly. This is an early afternoon. This is a day game. They are in Hawaii because they're obviously adjusting the start time to 7:30 p.m. Eastern for CBS audience, so they can get a prime out of it. Yeah, but I'm looking at it right now. It doesn't look like wind's going to be terrible either on Saturday, and that's always something you got to keep an eye on. When it comes to the weather in Honolulu on the island for these games. So and it will be warm. on Saturday. So it'll be interesting to see if both offenses can take advantage of that and be able to score their share of points here in this game. And again, you're getting the best of the total now because this opened, a few points higher. And now you're seeing it pretty much at 50.5 here across the board. There you have it. CFL Week 12, College Football Week 0. We hope you enjoyed the previews and the analysis. Rob, great job as always. And there's only one thing left to do. Those of you watching, hit the like button. That's one thing you got to do. We appreciate that. And the only other thing we have left to do is best bets, which can be anything. Could be one of the CFL games. Could be one of the college football games. Wherever you want to go, Rob, for best bet to wrap it up.
I tell you, it's probably not that hard, Ian, but I would go back to the BC-Toronto game. We both talked about it. I've actually bet it. You probably have as well. But that BC team total in that particular game, all you have to do is get yourself to 30 points. 31 points. I don't know that that's that difficult against the Toronto defense. So that's going to be my best bet for the show. It's going to be the BC team total on Saturday afternoon over the number against Toronto.
All right. BC team total over 29.5, as I know what I got in pocket earlier this week. You can still find it. I know some will have 29.5, some will have 30.5, but you're going to get it below 31, which is obviously a key number. So you'll still be able to get that out there for sure. My best bet, I'm going to go college, and I'm going to go with that Sam Houston, Western Kentucky, over 61. I think we get there. It's going to be a lot of pace on both sides. I do worry a little bit about, for Sam Houston, it's a new offense a little bit. Do they stall maybe more than we expect, but they're going to run a lot of plays. I'm not sold on the Western Kentucky defense. And then on the other side, I think the Western Kentucky offense versus the rebuilt, starting over from scratch Sam Houston defense could be a complete mismatch in favor of Western Kentucky with the familiarity that the new quarterback and offensive coordinator have, MacGyver and Bowie from their Abilene days, and I think they will light it up here, and you're going to get pace both sides. Weather won't be an issue. It looks like it's going to be hot. It's going to be very hot, too, in Bowling Green, Kentucky on Saturday. I'm seeing 90s Fahrenheit. And remember, this is the first game of the year, Rob. Those defenses can get winded in the second half, and that heat down in Kentucky. So keep that in mind as well. First game of the year, conditioning sometimes comes into play. So Sam Houston, Western Kentucky over 61 for my best bet. Rob, great stuff. Anything you want to add before we shut the show down and say goodbye?
Again, thanks for the invite, Ian. Always a pleasure to do the show with you. Obviously, respect all the information you bring to the table here. It's fun to talk with you. To the audience, good luck this year. Hopefully, if all of us have a big, big year, it's, as a lot of people like to say, all of us against the bookmaker. So hopefully we come out on top this season.
No doubt. That's the goal for sure, that we all have a great winning college football season and rest of the CFL and NFL, of course, when it starts as well. We will get Rob back on 1 week in September. We're trying to get a once-per-month rotation going with Rob, so we'll get him back on during the month of September. That'll be fun. CFL, NFL, and college football all to talk about. For Rob Vino, I'm Ian Cameron. Enjoy the week, CFL Week 12, College Football Week 0, and good luck. And we'll see you next week for another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy.